All right, welcome everybody. I am your host. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of the website techinterview.guide. And tonight we have Jen Batara on the stream with us. And you've probably seen her in chat. If you've ever been on my stream, you've seen Jen a ton in my chat. She is Jen Develops here on Twitch, on Twitter, all the places. Hi, Jen. How's it going?
Hi, good. I'm doing
Good,
great. How are
cool.
you doing?
Good. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. So tonight we're going to take a little bit of a different sort of path for what I would normally have on the stream. And what I want to do is I actually want to focus a little bit on Jen's job journey. So we're going to talk to Jen a little bit about her background and how she got into tech. We're going to talk about kind of some recent interviewing that Jen went on and how it turned into a whole bunch of job offers. And just how do you herd that many cats? How do you juggle that kind of stuff and stay organized through that kind of stuff? So let's dive in. Let's learn a little bit more about Jen. So looking at your LinkedIn, you've got a bachelor's in
Mhm.
bioengineering, you got a master's in bioengineering,
Yeah.
and your master's program you're doing like medical devices and bioimaging, and then you got into like bio research stuff with like protein purification. Can you explain, like I'm
Mhm.
five, like what is all of that?
Yeah. Originally I actually went to college and I was like, oh, I kind of want to go into the medical field, but I wasn't exactly sure I was 100% committed to do medical school. And so I went the bioengineering route. And at first I was interested in medical devices, which is why a lot of my undergrad like research stuff is in that. But then I kind of moved on into more molecular biology and drug discovery
Cool.
research. So a lot of the
Wow.
protein purification ends up being more for drug discovery research because we were trying to look for drug inhibitors of specific proteins.
Wow, that's pretty cool. All right. And
Yeah.
so you did that for several years. You were so you got your master's, but then you continued working in research for a while, and then you
hmm
started getting into tech. So how did you kind of make the decision to switch into like the tech industry, or to start pursuing development as like a side thing to then turn into a career? Like what? Tell us about that part of your journey.
Yeah. Yeah, so actually, before I even decided I wanted to go into the medical field, I had actually been coding for 4 years before that. I was really lucky. I had a high school that had computer science classes all 4 years of high school. And
Cool.
so I really enjoyed it actually. And I was thinking about becoming a CS major in college, but I don't know. I guess at the time I was young and I was like, oh, I don't want to sit at a desk for the rest of my life. I want to explore the world. I want to do lots of things. I want to be a scientist. And so that sounded really cool to me. But in my free time, I was still actually coding all the time. And even as my kind of graduate studies progressed, I started like learning data science and things like
Okay.
of that nature on the side, or like automating tasks and stuff. So that's how I naturally was like, I really enjoy this. Maybe I should do this as a like a profession instead of just a hobby.
That's cool. So when you were taking these computer science classes in high school, then what sorts of programming languages were they learning, or what kinds of concepts were they teaching at the time?
Yeah, so I mean, I was really lucky. I learned Java, so I was everything was
Okay.
object-oriented programming and data structures and algorithms kind of from the ground up. And
Okay.
so I probably would estimate that what I learned in high school was probably what you would learn maybe in your first couple introductory courses on like programming, how to structure and look at things in an object-oriented mindset and things like that.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. And so you didn't want a job where you're sitting at a desk, so you get into research, where I imagine you're probably sitting at a desk, or at least pacing a lab, waiting for
Standing
test results and
standing
stuff. Right?
at a bench.
Well,
So
I mean, I stand at my desk, so
yeah.
a lot of parallels here, I sense.
Yeah.
What made you then take a shift and look at a code school like Epicodus, and they're based in
Mm.
Oregon, is that right? So tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about that program and how you kind of transitioned into that.
Yeah, so I guess at that point, actually, so part of the reason that I said to switch was I was in a PhD program for a couple of years,
Hmm.
and I realized that the industry just really wasn't for me. I think academia is just really slow. It's not I'm someone who really appreciates feedback, negative or positive, kind of quickly.
Okay.
And I felt like academia wasn't really that, because especially when you make, like, what do you call it, when you make experiments, they take a while. Like, protein purification is a multi-day process, and you can't really speed it up in any way. There's a lot of things that you can change around, but it's a pretty established process. And so I was thinking to myself, yeah, this is not, I can't work on a molecule my whole career and never see it go to market. Like, I can't, this is not for me. And so I just yeah uh I have a brain fart, so could you remind me what your question was? I felt like I
Yeah.
rambled in the wrong
No,
direction.
it's all good. No, so it was kind of like, how did that lead into like getting back into tech? Like
Going to
you mentioned
Epicotus.
you,
Yes, yes, that was
yeah,
right.
you're
Yeah.
kind of coding along the way, but how did that turn into like I want to go like take some dedicated like software development
Yeah.
learning and stuff?
Yeah. So I felt like at the time, software development or full stack development in general was kind of becoming more of an accepted thing, where you could not be a CS major and kind of go
Mm,
into it. So that was one thing. And I realized with all of my scripting background, I at that point was very comfortable with coding and kind of, duct taping together something that would work for myself. But I felt like I didn't have a lot of exposure to the tools that I would need for a more full stack or like web app development kind of job. So
okay.
that's why I started looking into boot camps. And I would say for that, like, I wouldn't even recommend that everyone goes into a boot camp. But for me, I really like learning with others in a very structured environment, similar to what school was like. Cause for me, like, I really enjoyed school. That's why I was like doing graduate studies in academia for so long. It's because like
Right.
I'm a school person.
You're like a
And so that's
professional student.
why,
That was kind of your
yeah,
job for a
yeah.
while, right?
Yeah, it was my job for the longest time, and so I just kinda wanted to stay in it. And,
Mm,
that's why boot camp, I think, even though I felt like there are pros and cons to boot camp, and anyone who knows me personally, I am very vocal about the pros and the cons.
okay.
But I chose this boot camp, one mostly because it offered an internship at the end, a 5-week internship at the end of the program, and I felt like the hardest thing about career transitioning is finding that first job. So
Yeah.
even getting an internship is really difficult. And I remember trying to find an internship in college too, and it was like I felt like it was impossible. And
Mm,
so that was really valuable to me, and I just really wanted professional experience to push me in the right direction to
right.
go into my first job.
So Epicodus, they're based in Portland. Is that right?
Yeah, they're based in,
Yeah.
well, I think I can't remember if they're originally Portland or Seattle, but they
Okay.
have two campuses, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they have a 20-week full-time program and a 40-week part-time program, and then they do 2 weeks
Hmm.
of just interview training, and then this 5-week internship. So did you do the full-time program then, the 20-week program, or which one did you do?
Yes, I think I started in August of 2019, and I
Okay.
finished right before Christmas.
Hmm.
I think our cohort was a little bit weird because there was a very long holiday between like the actual end of our studies and then when the internship started. Didn't start until like
Okay.
January, so we had like almost 4 weeks of like just twiddling our thumbs, kind of looking for a job before the internship started. Yeah.
Gotcha. And then what was the interview preparation training like at that school? Like what sorts of like what's like one or two like the most memorable, useful kinds of tips that you learned about like getting ready to interview and so on?
Um, I think one of the most useful things, so they made us write cover letters and they made us update
Mhm.
our resume, which was really great. I had a lot of experience for doing that from like my university, because my university did a good job like training us to do that. But
Mhm.
I really liked that it was more, what do you call it, tech oriented. The other
Okay.
thing was is they also did a whiteboarding kind of interview to kind
Hmm,
of
cool.
get your feet wet in that regard. And I think one of the most valuable things actually was after that experience, and most of the cohort was like, this was a terrible experience. We hated the
Oh no.
whiteboarding. Um, we ended up creating like our own group that would go to a bar, and one of our cohort mates actually like bought a whiteboard, like a
Oh
large
wow.
one,
Yep.
and we would carry it to the bar, and we would like whiteboard
Practice
once a
whiteboarding.
week together. Yeah.
That's cool.
And that was probably one of the most valuable things I enjoyed for the
Nice.
interview parts.
I have mixed feelings about like whiteboard coding. Like whiteboards, I find they make for like good ways of drawing out like system design and like, I had this
Mm.
chunk of code talk to this chunk of code, or I had, this system over here talk to this microservice over there, and that talked to the database
Mhm.
back over this way. But to actually like write code on a whiteboard is such a tedious process. And yeah,
Yes,
that
I
that
agree.
that part of it I think needs to kind of die in fire, but it can be useful. Like it definitely has its place. But as far as like getting up and actually writing code on a whiteboard, like it feels very archaic to me. But yeah, I don't think you're alone in hating whiteboard coding for sure. Yeah.
I actually really enjoy whiteboard coding. Like you, I really don't like the part where you actually have to write out the actual syntax.
Hmm.
But I really enjoy the process of explaining my thought process behind how I'm gonna solve something. And I feel
Yeah.
like it helps you solve it in the process. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I mean, we could go on with all kinds of tips around like whiteboarding and stuff like that. But let's get to why we're here. So you're in the middle of a job change. So the
Yeah.
job that you're at right now, well, actually, let's before we get into that. So tell us a little bit like what's a typical kind of developer day for you like right now at your
Mm.
job. You don't have to go into specifics of like where you work and like projects that you're working on, but like what does a day in the life of Jen look like as a developer?
Yeah. So the company that I work at, I mean, my LinkedIn's public, so anyone can really see. But my day to day is mostly coding, and so I would say my role kind of falls into a few buckets. I am mostly consultant. And so what that means is like a large company who doesn't have any resources to build a prototype of something, typically a more like data focused app, will call our company and be like, "Hi, do you have anyone to build this for us?" And so typically I'll go on these projects, and a lot of the time I'm the only engineer. And for example, the most recent project I'm on, I have to kind of parse out. They're just like, "Hey, here's this data. Find something interesting, and let's make a data dashboard out of it." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." And so it can range anywhere from that to I had like a really, really large bank company project, and they already had like part of a code base kind of from a different project that they kind of dumped into text files, and they were like, "Hey, can you turn this into some sort of node graph, interactive node graph that's clickable and things like that?"
Wow.
And we're like, "Yeah, sure, okay." So like it's kind of all over the place in terms of what you're gonna get. It's a mixed bag. So
Yeah.
so from the day to day, when I'm on a client and I'm being built, that's the kind of work that I do. Most of it
Mhm.
is full stack development. um, and then on when I'm not billing a client, when I'm not on a project, we're creating a data engineering boot camp.
Oh, you're
And
making a boot
so
camp. Oh, that's cool.
yeah,
Neat.
the company I'm in is the founder has been like a data engineer for over 20 years, and
Okay.
just and honestly, I experience this too when I'm doing like data pipeline things or things like that. When you're trying to Google answers for some of these technologies, it's not like front end development where your answer is probably on Stack Overflow somewhere. A lot of the time, right now, it's not. I've ran into many problems where I was like, "This is not an answer anywhere. Oh no!" So that's part of the kind of the reason why I joined this company, was actually to create this boot camp. I was really
Hmm.
passionate
Okay.
about kind of paying it forward and really
That's cool.
wanting to have other people be able to enter tech, and
That's
even the
awesome.
more technical parts that are like data engineering or like things that you can't necessarily see that might be harder for people to get into. So yeah, so those are the kinds of
Very cool.
things I do day to day, either front
Okay.
end development, yeah, or curriculum development, or doing stuff for the client. So that's kind of
Awesome.
what I do.
That's a
Yeah.
lot going on. So, I mean, you got your finger in a lot of pies. Why was this a good time then to start interviewing to go do a job switch? Like, how did tell us a little bit about like how all these like interviews started coming up
Mhm.
and what sort of happened there.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this to you earlier. I actually didn't want to go on a job hunt. It kind of just happened. Um, there was a whole bunch of things that were happen for me personally that kind of my family was encouraging me to get another job. But at
Mm,
the end of the day, the other thing was is that even though I was 100% happy with where I was working with, team wise, everything wise, and even building a boot camp because that was something that I'd always dreamed of doing. Um, I felt like I wanted to skill up as an engineer.
mm,
And because I had been coding for so long, I was kind of really specific in what I was looking for. I really wanted to, well, we can like roll it back. I prototype a lot of stuff for
okay.
clients, and with that comes with kind of really tight deadlines and just kind of getting it to work. And that's
Mm.
that. Um, if there's
When you say
anything,
prototyping, sorry to interrupt. When you say prototyping, do you
yeah.
mean like build a like a proof of concept kind of app? Like, this is roughly what it
Mhm.
could look like. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, it's basically a lot of the times they'll also just end up being used. Basically,
Hmm.
it'll be the first iteration of the app that
Oh, gotcha.
they want to pitch, and then it's actually used, and then after that, their own engineers will iterate on top of that to
Gotcha.
like
Okay.
have any different other things on to added
Cool.
onto it,
Nice.
any other functionality. But yeah, so I felt like the client doesn't care if you test under the hood. The client doesn't care what they can't see, so I felt like a lot of the time, even though the pros was I could kind of learn whatever or use whatever tech stack I wanted most of the time for these different client projects. So like for example, this last time around, I tried using GraphQL because I had never implemented that before, and so that
Mhm.
was great. But at the end of the day, I need to still deliver something, and so I wanted to learn at a company that I could learn things like how to productionalize code, how to like think about automated testing, how to think about kind of like optimizing your
Okay.
kind of web app and just kind of like scalability concerns. Like all
Cool.
those things like I will never experience in prototyping. And so that's why I just wanted to skill up my engineering
Mm,
kind of text skills, I guess.
cool. So as part of that process, then you're updating like all your online profiles and stuff like that. So tell us about like what did you do on LinkedIn or other sites, and where did it go from there?
Yeah, so probably the first thing that I did was update my LinkedIn
Okay.
because looking on Indeed and stuff like that. I Indeed is great, but I just felt like LinkedIn for me it was just kind of easier to like check out the companies and kind of stalk the people who work there if you can say, because I really, for me, company fit is really a big issue for me. I want to
Mm,
enjoy the people that I work with, and like I said earlier, I really enjoy the people I work with now, so it would take really a lot for me to leave my current job.
right.
And so I kind of chose LinkedIn, and I updated my resume and I updated my LinkedIn. And of course, those go hand in hand because I could mostly copy and paste like things
Mhm.
in between them or tailor them. But yeah, that was my first step. And then I started because I wasn't really committed to actually finding a job in the beginning. I basically just sorted by, oh, which ones are easy applies, and just started like clicking
Gotcha.
easy apply on the ones where I didn't have to write too much. So that was kind of how I started.
Right. Were there any other sites that you used to like get a profile out there, or any other information about you and what you did, and so on?
Yeah, so actually the ones that ended up being the most fruitful for me was I personally like working at smaller companies,
Mm,
and so I ended up putting my profile on AngelList, and also this website called workforastartup.com. And this was just me kind of also being lazy.
How so?
Because yeah, I was just I remember how down I was the first time around
Mm.
during kind of the job hunting process. Because the first time around, really trying to get my first job into tech, I applied to so many companies and nobody responded to me. And
Wow.
I like wrote tailored cover letters for every single one, and like I really did my research on all the companies, but like no one emailed me back, called me back, or
Wow.
anything. And so this time around, I thought it would be an uphill battle again, and so I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna put my profile out there, and then I'm gonna update all these things. So like if there's any startups that would be interesting for me to look at or apply to, I have my profile up and ready, and I'll just go ahead and click apply. I think I did
Mm.
the same thing on Stack Overflow as well. I think Stack Overflow also has a profile. So
Okay.
I was just kind of prepping myself to start like clicking and applying. I was basically like, I just want to click and apply. I don't want to have to do the whole song and dance like I did last time and not get anything out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's what I did. That was my
Okay.
thought process behind that. Yeah.
Cool. So then, so you were still like, quick applying or rapid applying to some companies, but
Mhm.
then some companies also found you. Did they mention anything in particular about like, oh, hey, we found your profile on this site, or this kind of thing really stood out? Because one of the questions that I get the most on the stream is like, how do I stand out? Like, how do I get noticed?
Yeah.
What kinds of things should I be doing to like get my name out there? What did you sort of experience through this process that employers or the people that were reaching out to you were like, this caught our attention. Like this is
Yeah.
why we're reaching out to you.
So the funny thing is, like, I'm also a little bit bitter about this, but so I told you the first time around trying to find my first job, I got no replies. This
Right.
time around, technically, all the interviews I got, I didn't actually technically apply to any of these companies. They all reached
Hmm.
out. And I think it was all the profiles either from AngelList or from work at a startup. And I think the commonality I saw between all of the people who reached out to me was they were really interested in the work I had to do with mostly like data visualizations on the front end. And a
Hmm.
little bit and kind of like the full stack work I've been doing. The interesting thing was is that when I started making my angel list kind of profile, I filled in a lot of like, the frameworks that I use or the libraries that I use, like D3, Angular, blah, 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 things like that. And then a few days later, AngelList reached out. I don't know if it was automated or how they do this, but they asked if I wanted to be a featured candidate because they
Hmm.
said a lot of skills that I filled out in the skills section were like highly desirable or something.
That's
And
cool.
so I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And I clicked the yeah, sure, feature me. And so I think after that happened, I started getting a few more like reach outs from my profile.
So if I understand this right, all of the quick apply, fast apply things that you did on LinkedIn and Angel List, like you didn't end up interviewing with any of those companies. The companies that you ended up interviewing with found you themselves.
Yes, exactly. And
Wow.
the funny
That's
thing
wild.
is I think I interviewed at one of like the 20 to 30 companies I applied to on LinkedIn again. That's why early
Wow.
on in this process, I really wasn't married to the idea. I'll just stay at my company. It's fine. Like, I don't need to
Yeah.
do this again. Like, this is so, I'm over it. But yes, all, it, all the companies I ended up interviewing with, except for one, was they all reached out to me. And
Okay.
I was surprised at the number of companies that reached out. Um,
Interesting.
Within the first like 24 hours of like putting my profile up on work at a startup, I had like 4 or 5 companies reach out. And
Wow.
I was kind of like my jaw dropped. I was kind of like, what is going on right now? This is foreign to me.
Right. So getting all this
Yeah.
attention, you've got suddenly companies like banging on your door wanting to interview you. But you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier that you like, you know, you want a place where you like the people that you work with. where the
Mhm.
company culture values kind of align with your own. How did you
Yeah.
sort of like quickly turn around? Okay, well, I got all these companies. How do you research a company to figure out
Mm.
like this looks like a company that yes, I do want to interview, or like, nah, I'm not going to interview there. That looks sketchy, or it doesn't look like it fits for what I want in a job or in a company. Take us through that kind of process. Like, what kinds of things were important to you, and how did you figure out whether that happened at that company?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So in the beginning, to be truthful, I was so happy that companies were even trying to come look for me that I basically I first would look at what the product was, and if it was in, cuz I'm someone who's very mission driven. So if I don't believe in your product, I'm not going to bother interviewing with you because I know you and me will be miserable together working together. So that was basically the
Sure.
only filter that I had in the beginning. And so, but I was so happy in the beginning that I looked at that, and even if it wasn't something I was super interested in, I said yes first, which I highly, after going through this whole process, I do not do that, because I was swamped with interviews, like kind of the first like 30-minute initial kind of, hey, how are you doing, tell me about yourself, tell me about your
Mm,
company, things like that. And so I don't recommend that. But after I kind of went through my first week of kind of accepting anybody, and kind of talking to about like 6 or 7 different companies for those initial round interviews, I realized I was like, yeah, I can kind of start to see the patterns of companies that I'll like and companies that I wouldn't like. And the nice thing is that on AngelList and on Work on a Startup, there is a question there that specifically asks you what you're looking for. And so
mm,
kind of all the production level stuff I talked to you about earlier for like engineering, tech skills, and then I also explicitly wrote that I need management that's very transparent, and I like value communication above
mhm.
a lot of other
Good.
stuff. And so I think that's why eventually only certain companies started reaching out to me. And I
Okay.
noticed that
Huh.
was kind of like a common thread that, oh, like all of these people, they really value communication. They view kind of when you make a mistake as kind of a learning experience, and kind of being a little bit more generous in that regard.
Mm.
And so I think having that on there and me being explicit about that helped weed out the companies that didn't think I would be a good fit. So I think all in
Mm.
all, I talked to maybe anywhere between like 12 and 15 companies in the beginning,
Okay.
just kind of like the initial things. But yeah,
Okay.
so that's what I did for
Let's talk
that.
organization. How did you keep track of like all these companies? Like, did you just throw everything on a spreadsheet, or like how did you sort of track like these are the companies that have called, this is where I'm at in which interview stage, or this is what I like about them, or these are questions I want to bring up when I talk to them. Like how do you stay
Hmm.
organized for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I am a big Notion user. And so I don't know, have you ever used Notion, Ian?
I haven't myself, no. I've heard a ton
Okay.
about it, but I've never used it myself.
So Notion is basically like it's if you married Markdown with like a bunch of like other web app functionalities, and you have backlinks,
Okay.
and it also has like the biggest thing that I like about Notion is, I don't know what they technically call them. I think they technically call them databases, but they're basically tables. And the tables you can
Okay.
actually click into different views, and then each item on the table you can actually open up into its own separate page where you can take notes. And so I heavily use Notion to kind of put in the company, kind of who I'm talking to, and basically every single time I had an interview, I didn't really I didn't write down everything the person said, but I was furiously typing as I was interviewing the whole time. Luckily, interviews now are
Yeah.
on like Zoom and stuff, and so I'm able to do that. But yeah, I was kind of like
Yeah.
furiously typing away. And so I heavily used Notion, and the nice thing about Notion is you can have different views. And so there's also like a more Kanban view where you can see one of the properties of the things in the table was kind of like what step of the interview process it was.
Okay.
So I was able to look at the Kanban view and see, here's all the companies at this step, here's all the companies at this step. And then the rest of it was just Google Tasks kind of. I really felt like I was my own secretary for a good like 2 weeks there, because it was always like, hey, you always get the emails like, hey, what times are you free? Can you schedule on my
Hmm.
Calendly?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so Google Calendar my Google Calendar was blowing up, and I really
for
had
sure.
to every day stay on track with that. So that's kind of how I organized the whole thing.
And how did you juggle like, hey boss, I got my sixth dentist appointment this week. Like how how do you sort of mask like doing this many interviews while you've got a job? Like how did you juggle that sort of stuff?
So, I'm someone, I don't like to lie. And I
That's good because they're probably gonna watch this video and hear hear everything
No,
anyway.
I don't like to lie. And actually, the only
Yeah.
times the whole time that during the process that I took time off was actually having to take family members like to the doctor or something. So like those
Okay.
like though they might have sounded like excuses that I
So
probably
those
used
doctor's
to get an
appointments were
interview with.
actually doctor's appointments.
Those
All
are
right.
actually real. So I'm as funny as it sounds, but the thing is
Yeah.
that I didn't want to take time off for this because I told you I was still jaded from from the first time around. So
Sure.
I was like, none of these might not actually pan out. I'm on a client project, and I want to make sure that I still keep my work quality up. And so even though I was heavily in interviews during the day, I made sure that I didn't schedule any during any meetings. And then I'm lucky enough that my workplace is someplace where they don't really care what time of the day you get your work done. So you can
Nice.
kind of get it done whenever you want. And the downside to that was I would stay up until like 1 or 2 in the morning, or wake up really early in the morning to kind of finish my work and still push out like quality work.
Mm.
I would not recommend this method because I was very burnt out by the end of the whole thing.
Yeah, I bet.
And I props to my partner, like, because I have a young child, and so all of this wouldn't have been possible without my partner or my parents helping and things like that, because basically
Awesome.
for a whole month I was just working and interviewing, and that's all I was doing.
Mad shout outs to all the people that support us in all the geek things that we do
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Without them, I probably wouldn't have interviewed at so many companies, basically.
So how many total interviews well you mentioned about 15 companies or so. So do you have like a rough count of like how many total interviews did you go through before like you started shutting everything down? We'll get to the offers in a sec, but like how many interviews do you think you actually went through between the initial phone screen and like the technical interviews and so on?
Yeah, so like I guess initial companies talking to me, maybe around 15 of them, and then slowly they started weeding down to maybe around like 4.
Okay.
But then what happened was a friend of mine uh ended up referring me to a couple jobs.
Cool.
And then one of those panned out, and then kind of companies came in pretty late too in my interview process, and we're still like, hey, we still really okay, okay. And I find this very interesting. They already knew that I was very deep in the interview process with other companies, because like I told you before, I don't really like to lie. And so
Right.
I'm tell them straight up. I'm like, hey, I'm pretty tired. I've already interviewed with a lot of companies. I'm expecting offers from so and so many companies. Like, do you really still want to interview me? And apparently that made me more attractive of a candidate. And they were like, yes, we still really want to throw our hat in the ring. And I was not expecting that answer. So I was like, oh,
Yep.
well, sure. Okay. Why not? And they actually ended up being one of the companies that I liked the most that like offered me a job. So
That's cool. So I actually mentioned in the video I did a couple of weeks ago where I was just talking about like here's how to build a cover letter. You want to end that cover letter with something that's kind of kind of trigger that FOMO of like feeling of missing out. Like, it's like, do you still want to interview me? I'm expecting offers. It's like, yeah, of course we want to interview you. If you've interviewed enough to the point where you're expecting offers, then clearly you're a quality candidate, and of course we want to interview you too. So I could
Yeah.
definitely see how that would. That's not like
Yeah.
you might have meant it of like, nah, I'm not really interested in interviewing, but they're from their perspective, they're like, yeah, of course we need to interview. Like, we don't want to interview you, we need to interview you now. And so it's like really going to turn the tables, and that's how sometimes just how we word things to people can make a big difference on stuff. So
Yeah.
play on the, tug on that FOMO a little bit. It's amazing what that can do. So you get through all these interviews, and then the offers start coming in.
Yes.
So how many of those interviews actually turned into offers? How many offers did you end up with?
I think I ended up with around 7 offers in the end. Yeah,
Unbelievable.
it's pretty nuts.
That's great.
Even I didn't wasn't it. So I think typically people don't get as many offers because I'm someone who has a backup of a backup plan. And
Okay.
so even from the beginning, I clearly had companies that I liked, but a lot of the times, like, you never know if the company that you like and your like salary expectation will kind of like meet in the middle and like pan out.
For sure.
And so I just kept interviewing, like, and if I marginally liked a company, then I would keep going. And I think
Okay.
that's how I ended up with an obscene amount of offers.
So what did it feel like when the first offer came in, and then like more offers kept coming in? Like, you kept interviewing and you kept getting more offers. Like, walk us through those feels, because that
Yeah.
that has to be like an incredible roller coaster of its own.
So I was kind of still jaded, but the funny thing is the first verbal offer I got was from a company that I got referred to, and then I didn't even realize that I was going into a final interview with them. So what happened was I talked to kind of like their director of engineering, and like she was like, "Oh yeah, you like seem really passionate with what you're doing, even though you're more junior to the role." And the interesting thing was, since I'm earlier on in the my tech career, I had kind of all different kinds of titles that I was ended up
Okay.
kind of getting job offers for. And this particular one was for data engineering. And so since I had no like actual experience doing that, I was more considered more junior for that. Um and she the director was basically like, yeah, just set up some meetings with our recruiting agency, or not recruiting our recruiter, and then we'll go from there. And I kind of gave a bunch of times thinking that I was just going to talk to a couple people or something, kind of like the initial round interviews. And then all of a sudden she was like, hey, I can't really schedule without like a 4 hour block of time. And I was like, 4 hours? Like,
Four
what do
hours.
you
Wow.
need 4 hours for? And then so basically I talked to this lady, and then the next week, I was at an on-site, and that
Okay.
I didn't even know was an on-site until I got the email back from the recruiter and was like, "Hi, we've scheduled your on-site." And I was freaking out. I was so freaking out because this was the first on-site I was going to do with something
Okay.
like I don't even like I make a data engineering course, but I have a whole team supporting me on how to
Sure.
like explain data engineering concepts. I'd never actually done it, on a client, and I was freaking out. And so I thought I bombed that interview. And here's where I tell everyone, like, imposter syndrome is all in your brain, because I ended up getting an offer from them the next day when I thought I bombed that interview.
Wow.
And that was the first offer I got. So it
Okay.
kind of
Hmm.
shifted my mindset
Okay.
when I got to that point, because I was like, oh, wow, I'm worth something, that I'm worth more than I had originally anticipated. Um, and so I
That's
think
great.
it was a really big confidence booster to get that first verbal offer from an interview I thought I bombed. And then I think that really set the stage for the rest of the interviews I had, um, because I realized that most people just want to work with someone nice, and someone who can talk through their thought process. And that's
Yeah,
how I approached every single other interview I did from that point on.
that's great. So from the first offer to the last offer, how long did that take? Like you kept interviewing, like you still had all these other interviews lined up. Did you call any of them? Like once you got that first offer, did you call any of them and say, "Hey, I got an offer in hand. Like, can we speed it up?" Or did you just already have everything scheduled out and it just kind of played itself out? Like, what was the timeline between the first and last offer?
So, luckily, most of the final on-sites ended up being scheduled all within like a 2-week time span. So,
Okay.
from the first offer, I was actually maybe about a week out from an on-site with other companies.
Okay. Hmm.
And so, uh, the way it panned out was the first job offer. I would have liked more time, but it ended up being like I told them we talked about the numbers a little bit, and they were pretty acceptable for me, but I still wanted to wait. And so I asked them like, what's the final deadline that you want to talk? And I got lucky, and they just kind of pushed it off to like right around when I had already was going to interview with a couple other companies. And so I never actually had to have that direct conversation. The only thing but I was truthful to them, and I told them, "Hey, I have other job offers I
Okay.
anticipate coming in." So, and also like when they asked me about salary expectations and stuff, I told them I was like, "Hey, I'm not really sure. Um I want to say a number because I'm not a data engineer right now, so I don't know what the salaries look like." And so I was able to kind of skirt around a lot
Yeah.
of directly answering those kinds of questions and pushing it off a little bit.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
I think I got lucky, and I purposefully tried to schedule most of the on-sites really close to each other. So that week was
Hmm.
pretty brutal. It was like 3-hour interviews back to back to back to
Oof.
back, including a take home,
Yikes.
including my actual work that I also was doing. So
Right.
I was a zombie by the end. So
That's a lot to juggle. Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Um, Yeah, wow. And then did it, like when these offers start coming in, they usually give you some kind of timeline, like, we'd like some kind of response in so many days or a week or, I
Yeah.
mean, they're not ever like just open-ended, like, yeah, get back to us sometime if you want the job. Like they want to know whether you're going to take the job so that they can like either keep
Yeah.
interviewing or they can go to the next person in line. And this is sometimes why when you've applied for a job, you go through the interview and then you sit and you wait, it's because they've already contacted Jen going, "Hey, Jen, you want this job?" And Jen's like, "Let me finish these other interviews and I'll get back to you." Well, they're
Yeah.
holding up, you're basically holding up the line for other people. But did you feel any pressure from any of the companies around like, hey, like, it's been so many days or it's been a week or anything like that? Like, did any of them kind of put pressure on to respond?
Yeah. The
Hmm.
first company did. And
Okay.
I think that was an interesting dynamic because what also bought me some time was this role was originally for more of a senior data engineer, and I was clearly not that, right? And so they had to kind of hash out the numbers and see what was available to the team, and kind of talk to
Hmm.
the CFO and be like, "Hey, like how can we make this work?" So that person
Okay.
was on vacation for a little bit, so I bought some time there.
That's good.
And then after that, they were kind of, once they had the number and they told me the numbers, I didn't really respond with anything because I didn't know what these numbers meant. um and then basically they were like, I think that was what, oh no, it was a Tuesday, I think. And then they were like, hey, we want to know next Monday whether or not you want this job. And since
Hmm.
it was the
Okay.
first job offer, I was kind of freaking out because I was like, I have so many on sites next week, but they want an like a thing by Monday. I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
Um so but at the end of the day, I was like, I just kind of like, I need to breathe. I need to like have
Hmm.
inner peace and not feel kind of like any pressure, and be like, okay, sure, I'll meet with you on Monday. But then I basically told them, I understand that I'm being considered for a more junior role, but uh, I bring a lot of things to the table that fit a more mid-level engineer, and I feel like compensation is just too low for what they offered. And so
Mm,
that's kind of like I was ready to shut the book with that company, I guess.
okay. Mm,
But then so that's why it didn't really end up affecting me. And then the other company that offered a verbal offer the second time around, that also ended up being a little bit odd because I guess they really wanted me to move to where they were located, and I said no.
mm.
And so that kind of ended that process. But then they came back again and was like, we changed our mind. We'd be open to you being remote. So then they kind of came back around when I was getting all the other offers too.
Hold your
So I
ground on
think
these things. Yeah, you don't have to
I
cave to
just
what they want. It's about you
I,
too.
I I got lucky, honestly, that
Yeah,
everyone kind of came in around the same time.
yeah. That's pretty great. And then as far as like negotiations and so on, did you like,
Hmm.
did you pick like the top three and like other ones? Like there, it's interesting when you have multiple offers that you then get to tell somebody no, thank you. Like I appreciate your time, but
Yeah.
not gonna happen. Like how did those conversations play out, and then how did you kind of start to narrow it down? Like how do you, like compensation packages are very different. So how do you compare like
Yes.
apples to oranges? How did you kind of start figuring out like which ones were worth pursuing or not pursuing, and then like sort of narrowing it down from there?
So I guess to kind of explain, the companies that I were getting offers from were wildly different in terms of, what do you call it, like in their life cycle. They were all
Okay.
startups, but they were all startups at different points in their life. And so I had a
Okay.
couple companies who were still technically startups, but they had been around for 10 years, have over like
Hmm.
500 employees. And then I had startups
That's
that
not a
were
startup anymore.
like, yeah, but they still, like, some of them still call themselves a startup. I disagree with that, but anyways,
Me too. Anyway.
and then some of them were like they had just raised their Series B, and then anybody can drop comments in the chat if they don't know what that means. And then I had, I think, one post Series A, um one pre-seed, and one like
Hmm.
seed stage. So they were all over the place, and I guess I noticed like general trends, and kind of my offers kind of fell into two buckets. Offers that were like between, for like at least the cash portion, between like 80 and like maybe like 100, and or like below 120 and over
Hmm.
120k.
Okay.
And I think uh and for the ones that were lower in cash, some of them were like maybe they had some sort of bonus scheme throughout the year, or they had other benefits like paying for your health insurance and things like that. But there was no
Hmm.
actual trend with like how many really like, if you what do you call it, added out the numbers of the benefits,
Hmm.
no company, even the larger companies, came out to more than like, it was less than 10k in benefits. So if you think about it,
Hmm.
it's not negligible, but it also wasn't the
Sure.
biggest factor in the decision for compensation. They were just like nice to have to try to distract you, I felt like, from what was
Yeah.
really important, which was like the main base salary and other like cash components to your compensation package.
Mhm. That's great. So then, as you start narrowing them down, then did you negotiate on any of the other ones? Like you kind of mentioned earlier, like you kind of self-advocated for like, hey, I know you're offering me this junior role, but I actually bring like intermediate level skills,
Mm-hmm.
and advocating for yourself. You got to do it. You have to do it. No one else is going to advocate for you but you. And I'm
Yeah.
a big believer in like stand up for what you want, stand up for what you believe in. Like that stuff is critical. You got to do that stuff. But how did you then start to sort of address like other parts of the negotiations, or did you negotiate? Did you like pitch the offers against each other at all? Like did you end up sharing
Mm,
information about the offers with other companies to try to like bump them up a little bit or anything like that?
yeah.
Like walk us through that side of it.
So anytime, okay, so I said earlier in the stream, I don't like to lie or fib
Mhm.
really. Especially in these things. I really want to trust the recruiter and I want them to kind of hand me
Sure.
respect and trust back. Um, so to my family's dismay, I would not outright say, "Oh yeah, I have an offer for like some obscene amount of money. Like, can you match that?"
Right.
Like, I didn't do that. For some of them
No,
in the
and
earlier
and to be
stages,
clear on the
yeah,
stream, you don't have to be dishonest about those things. Like you can
yeah,
legitimately say
yeah,
like I have an offer for X dollars, I have this offer for X dollars, like but I'd really rather work for you. So what can you do? So yeah, I wasn't trying to
yeah.
imply like be dishonest in any sense. Like but some people will
Some
coach you and
people
say
do
like
do that though.
don't even tell the other company that you have another offer, or you can say I have an offer, but I'm not going to disclose it. But like, can you do better than this? But as a
Yeah.
company that feels like we're kind of like, walking in a room with a blindfold on of like, we don't know what the target is if you don't give us something. How do we know we're going to beat it or not? And I relate a story about this back in the day. I was a director of engineering and we interviewed this guy and he said, I've got an offer. I said, we'll beat it. Just tell me the details. We'll beat it. And we did. We beat it by like 5K. And then he came back and he's like, well, thanks anyway. But I actually also had an offer from Amazon and it's like way more than you offer. I'm like, why didn't you bother telling us that? Instead of wasting our time, we
Yeah,
would have just said,
yeah,
we can't match Amazon and like let you go on your way. But like,
yeah.
but I know some coaches, they'll be like, don't share any information. Other coaches will be like, it's okay to say like, I've got an offer for this much, I've got an offer for this much, and you don't have to say who the companies are. Where do you stand as like I get and I totally applaud you for like wanting to
Mhm.
be honest and have that sense of integrity. I'm a big person, when it comes to integrity as well. Um, and so you don't want to like try to mislead or lie about what you've got, although
Yeah.
some people do. But what was kind of your tactic around like telling them like, hey, I've got these other offers, like, can you match
Mhm.
it? Can you beat it? I'd really rather work for you. Like what sort of negotiation steps did you take?
So, well, for this portion, it was interesting because I kind of A/B tested my profiles. On the Angel List one, I actually wrote
Hmm.
I wanted at least 120K, and on the Work from a
Okay.
Startup one, I did not. And so,
Okay.
um, so when I was getting calls from people from Angel List, I kind of had an idea of what kind of offers they were trying to give me.
Hmm.
And when kind of companies started coming to me earlier on and I didn't have any other offers, I would just tell them, "Hey, I'm looking like you offered me." I think they offered me at least around like 120, which is like the bare minimum that I thought I would be happy with.
Sure.
And I said, "Well, to be honest, this is like the bare minimum." And I would actually was looking for this like X amount of dollars as a salary um, going into this. And they said, "Okay." And we'll kind of talk about it more. And since the amount that I asked for, I think it was not more than 20% more, I think. Yeah, it
Mhm.
was less than 20. It was like around 15% more. And I think
Yeah.
that was a good range because we were kind of still in the same ballpark with each other in terms
Sure.
of compensation bracket. And so for the first offers, I did that. But when other offers started coming in, I said the same thing to them. I want X amount. That's kind of what I'm looking for.
Okay.
And since they and I told them I have other job offers, but I never said that the job offer was for that amount. So, but they knew I was
Okay.
looking for that amount. And then the subsequent companies started offering me that amount or higher. So then once I
Okay.
got that higher number, then whenever the next company came along and asked me what I'm looking for, I was like, well, I guess I'm worth more, so I can ask for more now.
Yep.
And so
Sure.
that's kind of how it snowballed into,
Hmm.
yeah, into really high offers. And I was just kind of like, what's going on here?
From a company's perspective too, when you say I've got an offer and I want to be making X, they're going to say, like, in their mind, they're thinking she has an offer for X. We need to beat it. And that's why a company is going to come back and like try to give you like a little bit more than that. Or they'll say, well, we can
Yeah.
match that as salary, but we're going to like add all these other perks or whatever to, kind of
Yeah.
tip the scale in our favor or something. So, I mean, dollars to dollars, I mean, you can do that kind of comparison, but then you've also got the
Hmm.
comparison then of kind of going all the way back to something you mentioned early in the stream around like just company culture and who are you going to work with and who are the
Yeah.
employees and things like that. What sorts of considerations did you have to make there for kind of making those final decisions and narrowing down like the last sort of decisions?
Yeah. And so I think of all the companies that I interviewed with, I really had like a top four. It was originally a top three, and then I told you about that
Okay.
last company was like, "Hey, we're gonna swoop on in," and they ended up in the top as well. Um, I had to cut one out solely because of compensation. Every single person I talked to, they were great. I knew people who worked there. They're amazing too. And at the end of the day, though, when I started getting these really high offers, um, and this is where I think building that like trust and respect relationship with the recruiter really helped because I was like, hey, recruiter, I'm not trying to, and people approach this differently. Like, I definitely know my partner approaches like job offers and stuff completely differently. And so it kind of hurt
Yeah.
him a little bit on the inside that I'm not looking for every last dollar. Um, but basically, I told the recruiter, I'm not looking for every last dollar from you. But basically, I love everything about your company, but I cannot take this job offer because what you're telling me is that even if I get promoted, I would not even the salaries that I'm being offered right now are kind of like two or even three salary bands up from the level that I'm being like entered at. So even though like you said it's possible for me and she's like it's highly likely that I will be promoted to the next level, I would still be
Mm-hmm.
underpaid compared to I guess apparently what my market value was. And I
Wow.
think being honest with the recruiter, and I told her I was like, I told you I really like you. I like everything about a company. I just that's not possible for me. Like it doesn't make any sense. And
Right.
this is where I think she was like, I really appreciate your answer. It was a very mature answer, and I completely understand. And typically, I've been told this company doesn't add on to their base salary. They just don't.
Mm-hmm.
But she actually went out of her way to try and add on to this package
Yeah.
and add on even a
Wow.
signing bonus where she said it was usually not considered for the level I was being considered at. And yeah, and so that's why I think it's very important for you to just like don't treat recruiters as the enemy and really kind of
Mm-hmm.
work with them because they're really going to try to work with you. And in the end, she was like, I really appreciate it. I know I'm really kind of like lowballing you, hearing the other offers that you have. I really appreciate you not getting mad at me. And I was like, oh my goodness, I feel so bad for you if like people actually get mad at you for this. But yeah, it's just that's kind of how I approached all of those kind of compensation questions and negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
I told them what I thought was fair, and then I also started telling them when I started getting high offers what those highest offers were.
Yeah.
And then
That's cool.
naturally companies just wanted to beat them either with like either as the base salary or like plus a sign-on bonus kind of thing. Is some sort of
Right.
scheme like that.
Yeah, and the important thing to mention on the stream too for people listening, like that sign-on bonus though, it's a one-time thing. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it does bump up that first year compensation, but then your next year's compensation or any raise you get is based on that lower salary, and you're not going to get that
Mhm.
sign-on bonus again. So even if they do give you like an extra 10K, 15K, I've heard of signing bonuses of like 50 plus as well. That's like a one-time thing, and you're taxed on that money immediately. And
Yeah.
so you're not even taking home 10K. You're going to take home like 6K, maybe a
Yeah.
bit more depending on your tax bracket and so on. So, you know, but it's a one-time thing. And next year your raise, even if you get like a 5% raise, that raise may still come in lower as the total annual salary than your first year's salary plus that cash signing bonus. So, It's
Yeah.
definitely something to consider there. But I mean, hopefully within that year, you're proving yourself and you can kind of negotiate, like when it is time for that raise, to kind of negotiate for that higher raise. But that can be tricky territory for sure. Um, cool. So at the end of it, you had 7 job offers and you narrowed it down. Did you end up accepting one?
Yeah, I actually did end up accepting one,
Cool.
and it was
Great.
kind of serendipitous because, like, yeah, the top 3 companies that gave me the top offers were the ones that I actually liked the most. So
That's great.
I got lucky in that sense, I guess. There was only one company that was like really unfortunate that I really wanted to work for, but I mean, if it doesn't
Yeah.
work out, it doesn't work out. So
Yep. For sure. Awesome. We got a couple of questions in chat that I'd love to address too.
oh,
So Jen, I
okay.
appreciate you kind of walking us through that whole journey. I think it's, understanding how someone goes through the interview process and starts getting offers and how you can negotiate those things. I mean, hearing those tips and
Hmm.
perspectives from lots of people is really crucial. And that's why I love doing the stream and having folks like you on here. So appreciate that. CodeLex89 had 2 questions I want to address. The
Okay.
first one is, how can you handle like a bad interview where you end up feeling depressed and you feel like you don't know anything? I kind of get the sense from your first job hunt, where you kind of admit like being pretty jaded about things, not getting calls back, and so on. Um,
Yeah.
what kinds of tools or tips can you share to like help somebody through that? Because that's a tough process for sure.
I think what I would say to myself when I was doing my job hunt the first time, and I think I got a lot of this advice, but I didn't really take it to heart until the second time around, was like, um, when you're interviewing for a company, it's really like a two-way street. Like, you shouldn't feel like your worth is tied to whether or not you get job interviews. Like, you're
Hmm.
more than just someone who makes money for someone else. And I mean, makes money for yourself, because money kind of
Yeah.
helps you stay alive. But basically, I think for a lot of people, and me included, kind of the financial aspect of getting a new job is so daunting. And having that kind of extra burden made it very difficult for me to think clearly and not feel like I was a failure the first time around when I didn't get any callbacks. Um, so I think if you kind of like are a little bit easier on yourself, and I think especially when you're career transitioning, if you have to keep working that other job that you don't like, it's okay. Like, it's not like, even if you get there slower, you're still getting there. And so I think
Yeah.
that not tying your self-worth to like the whole job interview process really helps kind of try to dissociate those two things. The other thing is like, I think imposter syndrome for career transitioners really plays a big role in kind of amplifying your emotions
Mm.
about how you feel after an interview. And so am someone who has very high standards for myself in whatever that I do. And so that's why I told you I was very, very upset with myself after what I thought I bombed an interview. And like, lo and
Mm.
behold, I ended up getting a job offer. And so I think like if you're more kind to yourself and just be like, if you and I talked to so many companies and they were like, no, no, thank you. After talking to me, they were like, no, thank you. We're not interested in you anymore.
Mm.
Like, you don't have to take that personally, if that makes sense. Like, that doesn't mean
Yeah.
that it's like your fault that they don't want you. There's like so many things that could be like the case that you just kind of didn't fit together. And so I think
Yeah.
kind of seeing it from that angle kind of makes it hurt less, even though
Right.
it is, I would say, emotionally draining.
It's definitely a tricky emotion to kind of deal with. So I was on a podcast with Martin McGovern last week, and we got talking about this kind of topic too. Of like, we tell people in our coaching, like, don't take it personally, but at the same time, we're like, be your authentic self and be you, and like go do that interview. But then they reject you. Well, if you were really your authentic self and they reject you, how do you not take that personally? And so it does feel like a bit of a paradox of, it's not you, it's a business decision, but
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
you interviewing for that job and they say no. And at the end of the day, it really is a business decision. I mean, if they have a bias against you, then you don't want to work there anyway. So, I mean, if it really did come down to
Exactly.
like a personal bias, like I don't like the color of Ian's hair, or Ian wore like some really nasty aftershave or something, like, you know,
People
like
don't like my
then you
Funko
don't.
Pops.
Right. Then you don't want to work there anyway. If you don't like my Funko Pops,
Yeah.
then I don't want to work with you anyway. Um,
Yeah.
and that's a legit thing. But when you're job hunting and you're trying to get those interviews, and then you do finally get an interview and the interview doesn't work out, it does feel pretty crushing. Like
Yeah.
rewind 25 years, I'm getting into the tech industry and I'm getting rejection after rejection. I actually kept them printed out in a file folder, and I kept reading through them from time to time. Like I would just go through these bouts of depression myself where I'm just like, nobody likes me, nobody wants me around. Pull out this file folder and look, these people didn't want me, these people didn't want me, these people didn't want me, these people didn't want me. And it's so toxic. And I honestly, I got to a point, I was living in Canada at the time, and I'm like, I'm going to go camping this weekend because I love just getting outdoors. And I took that file folder with me and I used that as kindling to start a campfire one night. And I'm like,
Yes. I was
I
like, did
can't
you
hang on
burn
to this
it?
anymore.
Yes.
I can't, yeah, like it literally needed to die in fire. Like you can't hang on to that anymore. You have to let that go. And it's easier said than done. I totally get that. So Codelex, I totally get where you're coming from, that it feels pretty crushing. And there are a lot of emotions around it. But please know, you're not in the job hunt alone. You're not in the journey alone. There's people like Jen and I that are here to help you out. Like we're all
Yes.
about community. Jen is currently doing mentoring, and like Jen's on like several streams, usually just lurking in chat, ready to ask good questions. Tonight you're on the receiving end of those questions, but like there are so many folks around that want to help out. And so please know, if you're listening to the stream live, if you're watching it on YouTube later, you're not in it alone. There are a ton of people around you. There are
Yes.
huge communities of people around you that want to help you, that want to lift you up and help you succeed. You just got to reach out for the help. But
Yeah.
if you kind of, stay inward and like bring all those feelings inside, and you don't talk about them and you don't seek help from other people, then yeah, it's just going to turn into this big toxic, downward spiral. And so it is
Yeah.
important that you talk to folks and you get the support and the help that you need, because we're here. We're here to do exactly that.
Yes, exactly. You can do it. I just really feel like paying it forward in tech is so helpful to the community, because the more you pay it forward, the more the kind of people that you like that aren't elitists will come
Right.
into the industry, and I get to work with all these people. So that's kind of my philosophy behind that.
Yep. That's great. Cool. So next question from Lex. What red flags can you identify in job offers? For example, the wrong title,
Mm.
partial or unclear information, like not the job conditions, benefits, taxes, legal issues, or confidential information. Um, there aren't too many things that really stand out to me as like, I'm not going to take this job specifically because of what they wrote in that job offer. Although sometimes there can be things where you just have to have a conversation with them. The biggest one I would say is going to be around like ownership of ideas. In
I was
tech,
just about to say
you're
that
going to come
one.
up
Yeah.
you're going to come up with ideas all the time, and what you don't want to have happen is like go home and work on some side project, and then you show your boss, and your boss is like, thanks, we own that now. And some states like California, for example, they actually started passing laws that companies can't do that anymore. Anything you develop on your own time is yours. It belongs to you. You are the copyright holder. But companies will typically make you sign an agreement, but this is typically the employment agreement, not the job offer. The employment agreement will say anything you invent belongs to us. And you can always get clarification on what that actually means. But those are also things that you could negotiate ahead of time. Like when I was working at, or getting ready to take my job at Turing, where I taught for 4 years, I was still doing all this tech interview guide kind of idea and writing a lot of, content, publishing content. I had my daily email series that I was working on publishing. And so I actually negotiated as part of the job offer. It's like, I want to maintain copyright on everything I write. I'll contribute it as open source to Turing, but anything I write, I have the copyright. And they're like, okay, that's fine. And so sometimes you have to explicitly say those things, or some companies will say like, give us a list of your projects so that we can explicitly say we do not own these things and we have no interest in owning these things. And if you do come up with something on the side, bring it in and we'll add it to the list. Some companies are pretty cool about that. Some companies are pretty hard nosed though, and they'll be like, no, if you invent it, we own it. And then you've got to kind of go through this legal hurdle. Aside from that, there aren't too many things that I've seen in job offers myself that are like, oh, run away, like don't take that. Jen, any thoughts, anything that in any of these job offers that really stood out that you're like, ugh, like I don't like that.
So once you get into startup land or other larger tech companies where that are public, you'll start getting things where you start getting equity as that's a large portion of your actual compensation package. And kind of understanding how equity works, understanding how vesting works, and what a cliff means, like all of that is kind of really helpful for you to make your decision. Because I've heard some companies have some crazy like amount of years to vest their total stock.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere
Yeah.
6 to 10 years is like insane to me. And so that's why they call some of those jobs like the golden handcuffs, because like they're giving you stock options. And what that means is like they're giving you the opportunity to buy stock at a certain price. And most of those prices are really, really low. So you're basically like buying money for really low, and you could probably, if you don't mind paying your higher taxes, you could sell it immediately and just be sitting on mountains of cash. But kind of
Yeah.
understanding that whole process, it can be confusing in the beginning. And so don't let recruiters. I was lucky enough that everyone that I talked to was very honest and very forthcoming in, oh, you don't know about this, let me give you some resources to learn about what all of this means. But I would say some companies probably don't let you know on purpose. And so asking about those numbers upfront when you get that verbal offer and understanding all the things that happen, like what happens if you leave the company before those 10 years are up? Like how
Mm-hmm.
many days do you have to exercise those options? Like those kinds of
Yeah.
things are really important. They actually mean real dollars. And so
Yeah.
don't like understand that whole process, I would say.
I've had a lot of conversations about that with folks, and there are some companies where like the day you leave is the day you have to decide if you're going to buy your options. A lot of those contracts will say if you get terminated, you have to buy them that day, which is kind of feels weird because it's like if you're dismissing me from this job, why am I going to invest my dollars back into your company because I don't have this job anymore? So why do I care?
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
a lot of tech companies they'll say you've got 90 days to like come back and like buy the options or exercise the options, which is buying the shares. Some companies, there was actually one company, I think it was a Pinterest. They actually came they actually made an announcement in the tech industry. I want to say it was back in like 2014, maybe 2015, where they said, hey, you know what? We understand that when people leave the job, they don't always have thousands of dollars on hand to buy the stock options. So we're going to give you years to come back and buy
Hmm.
those stock options. It was something like 5 years or 10 years or something, where it's like you could
Yeah.
come back and buy those options at any time. And that was unheard of in the industry. Everyone was like, what?
Yeah. A
Because
lot of
they
companies are
understand
starting to
like
get on that bandwagon now.
yeah. Now, when a company is public, you're more likely gonna get like reserve stock units, which is where you're getting the discount on the stock and things like that. And there's different implications, especially around taxes with that stuff. I would say one of the other things to really watch out for is if they offer you. The first thing I would say to keep in mind when you get a verbal offer, it means nothing until it's written down on paper or you've got it in an email and there is a paper
Hmm.
trail saying this is the title, this is your salary, and they actually give you hard details. Anything they tell you over the phone, like, yeah, okay,
Hmm.
it's good to know. Can I get that in writing, please? Like, can I, like,
Hmm.
okay, I appreciate the offer. Why don't you send over the details and, like, I'll look it over, is kind of how you want to respond to that. You never want to take it just from a verbal offer. But then when you do get the written offer, you want to double check, like, does the title match? Do the responsibilities match? Um, some companies are also really vague and they're like, well, you're going to do software development plus any other duties that we stipulate down the road. It's like, well, you're going to make me take out the trash and do janitorial work too? Like, what are these other duties? Are they going to be tech specific? And so you have to ask clarifying questions around those kinds of things if you see them in a job offer letter. Um, But I haven't seen too many things where it's like, oh, do not sign this under any circumstance. There are very few of those. I would say the one that I have seen, it was like it was one of these companies where you were it's almost like an internship, and they're saying like we're gonna hire you for 2 years, but if you leave you owe us like 30 grand or 40 grand or something like that, because we're investing in your knowledge for you then to go get that second job, and if you leave before 2 years is up you owe us like this big hunk of money. And those kinds of things we tell, like I would tell a student like don't sign that, don't take that job. Like why did you even interview
Yeah.
there? Like because companies like that exist. They're like, oh yeah, we'll totally
Yeah,
build up
yeah.
that work experience, but if you bail, you have to pay us back for our time and our resources, and it's not worth it.
Yeah. And I highly don't recommend those kinds of companies because they
Yeah,
really, really hardcore try to recruit people who are really early into tech because you get paid really low salaries compared to what you would get paid if you had find your job outright. And then you have to commit
yeah,
2 years to that salary, which in tech, like, even though I personally like staying at companies longer, some people job hop every 1 to 2 years, and that's like a more normal thing now. So 2 years of time is a lot of time to invest for your life where
yeah,
you're getting underpaid.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Next question from CodeLex. So CodeLex, I appreciate the questions, by the way. These are great. Do you have some methods or strategies when you're looking for possible companies to work? For example, how can we create a list of companies like dream company, good company, big, small, and so on? So if you go back and look at my YouTube channel, I actually did a whole session on like company research and the kinds of things that are important to you and how to sort of rank those and how to find that information online. Like some, you can find some on LinkedIn and Glassdoor and so on, to kind of fill in a spreadsheet of that kind of information. But then anything where you can't find information, if you find an employee of the company and start doing networking and outreach to them and say, hey, I was able to find this information. Can you confirm this? And, or I wasn't able to find information about this. Can you tell me more about such and such? It also helps with the networking side of it, because a lot of people get really hung up on like, oh, I don't like networking because I never know what to talk about. Well, if you start building a spreadsheet of things that you're trying to find out about the company and you can't find information, now you get things you can talk about. And you specifically say like, hey, I want to talk to you about like the tech stack that you use at your company, or I want to find out like, what's the ratio of, developers to non-developers at the company, or gender equality, like those kinds of things within the organization. Like I want to find out these kinds of stats because your company doesn't publish anything like that, and that's something that's important to me. And so how do I know that I'm going to get into a balanced kind of workplace where
Mm.
lots of good ideas and so on? Like you can find that stuff out through that networking and outreach just by trying to fill out a spreadsheet of things that you're trying to find out and whether you can find it yourself or not. If you can find it, you want to confirm it with them. And if you can't find it, now you've got a pointed question that you can actually like fill in that blank. Jen, any other tips on like company research, or like how you
Yeah.
would so like you mentioned initially like the companies that you interviewed with found you, but for the companies where you're
Hmm.
doing the quick apply, like how are you kind of looking at them going, I think this is what I wanted? You mentioned a little bit like looking at their product
Yeah.
and so on, but take us through a little more of that.
So I actually, even the companies that did reach out to me, I actually on the spot rejected a bunch of them because, like I said, I look at their website. Am I ever interested in their product? If no, or if there just like seems to be some personal red flags for me, like all these engineers kind of worked at like a such and such company, and I know I don't particularly like the work environment at that company, like they might kind of bring that over to their own company, so that's kind of something that I might not be interested in because work culture fit is very important for me. The other thing is I highly suggest people to kind of not have dream companies, I guess. People get really hung
Mm.
up on like the really big tech companies, like the FANG companies, and I think it's a really good aspiration to have. But I think a lot of people are like too hung up on their one dream company, and then it ends up being not everything they expect it to be. Just because a lot of the time what they advertise um is not necessarily what you're going to get, because at really really big companies it's very highly team dependent the type of experience you're going to get. And so I highly suggest when you're earlier on, just kind of entertain those other companies, entertain the smaller companies, because a lot of the time they'll have a lot more bandwidth to kind of mentor you in the right direction, or have more incentive to, because they don't have as many employee as those large companies.
Mm.
The other thing
Yeah.
that I like to do is I like to go on LinkedIn, see who works there, see kind of like where they went to school, and then I just start googling their name, checking out their Twitter, checking out their GitHub if they're a developer, and kind of getting a better sense of the kinds of things that they do in their free time that are coding or non-coding, to see if I would even mesh well with this person. I don't know how deep other people go, but I really start like I try to find their Instagram if they have one and things like that. And
Mm.
I just try to see, like, because for me, I really have to like working with the people that I work with. Otherwise, like I know I won't be able to produce the best work that I can. So that's why I go
Yeah.
through all that trouble to like check out people and see what they do and stuff.
Yeah, it's a really important thing. Like you have to like what you have to like the people that you're doing it with, and you have to like the the work that you do. Like those are so critical. And you have to like the management and the management structure and things like
Mhm.
that. Like the company I work at now, Stream, which is the 3D printed logo over here. I worked for them. I went and worked somewhere else for 4 years, and I went back to Stream because Stream is a great company, and I really like the leadership, and I know that they've got good mentors themselves, like the CEO and the CTO of the company. They've got good mentorship, and because I trust who they're getting mentored by, I can then trust them that they're going to make good decisions, and that all plays into how they run the company. And so then okay, well, I mean, every company's got its bumps and whatever. No company's perfect. But kind of go back to something else that you're saying, Jen, like getting locked in, or sort of that like tunnel vision on like I must work at Google, or I must work at such and such.
Yeah.
You can also get really locked into tech stacks as well. Like, I learned JavaScript, and so I have to go find a JavaScript job. It's like, you don't have to. It'll
Hmm.
be easier for you to, because you've got that like that immediate experience, but you could still go get another job in a different language. You just have to tell them how you're going to transition that knowledge, or transfer the knowledge from how much about JavaScript you learned into Python or Ruby or C Sharp or like whatever else. But I've also interviewed people who are like, oh, I love Ruby on Rails. Like, I'm going to work in Ruby on Rails forever. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, we're already considering like switching our tech stack for some project 6 months down the road. If we switch that tech stack, are you going to quit because you're so locked into that tech stack that you don't want to work in anything else? Are we going to lose you as an employee because suddenly we change our mind? And so I think it's just as important about being flexible about where you work, as opposed
Hmm.
to how you build what you're building, because languages change, frameworks change. I joke all the
Yes.
time. It's like in the span of this live stream, like 3 new JavaScript frameworks were released. um, and it's a reality in tech. Like, things are going to change. Like, how we did things 25 years ago doesn't happen that way anymore. Heck, 5
Hmm.
years ago, like a lot of what we did 5 years ago, we don't do it that way anymore. Like 5 years ago, like Docker was still just kind of becoming a thing, and like containerization was like kind of this new, like, ooh, look at this shiny thing. And now it's like a common day. Like, if you're not using Docker, like, people are like, what are you, back in the Stone Age? Like, why aren't you using containerization and automatic deployments and whatever? Um, so like how we did things 10 years ago, where you're like manually deploying stuff, we don't do it that way anymore. And so don't feel like you're locked in on a tech stack either. You got to be flexible in this industry.
Hmm.
You got to constantly stay learning. Kind of going back to what you're saying earlier too, Jen, is like, you want to constantly keep learning. You want to constantly
Hmm.
kind of evolve yourself, and stay up to date on technologies. It's an important thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's part of the reason why I said I wanted to find a new job, right? It's because I feel like in a job you're supposed to be constantly learning, and I am constantly learning in my current job. But a lot of the things, I feel like one of the green flags I like is when companies say, these are some things that we would like you to know, but if you are fluent in another tech stack and you want to interview, like, we want a Python developer, but if you want to interview using JavaScript, we don't care. We're just like wanting to know if you can think about problems and how to solve them. And those are like green light companies to me because I'm like, oh, so you just want to know if I can think about a problem and you worry about learning the tech later, which I think it kind of goes in line with like what you're saying of technology always changes, but the way that you solve a problem oftentimes doesn't change as rapidly. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I like looking at that.
Great. Cool. Well, let's entertain a couple more questions in chat if anything comes up. And while we wait to see if anything else shows up in chat, rapid fire silly question time with Jen. So those that hang out on my stream know that when I have a guest on here, I love asking just ridiculous questions. So I'm gonna rapid fire, and it's not meant like don't sit and think about it. Just what's the first thing that pops to your
Okay.
mind? Like how many chickens would it take to take down an elephant?
150.
Would you rather have no nose or no arms?
Probably no nose.
What sport are they going to add to the Olympics next?
Oh man, I'm not a sports person. I was gonna say speed walking, but they already have that.
Really?
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
like darts or something, right?
Oh, that would be cool. I would like that. Yeah, because I already like archery, so darts would be really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. If animals could talk, which one would be most boring?
A sloth, because they're probably sleeping a lot, or just like too lazy to talk.
Who would make a better roommate, a goat or a bird?
A bird, a goat would eat all your stuff.
Maybe. If you could be a fly on the wall, who would you want to listen in on?
Probably Michelle Obama. She just seems like a nice person who has a good way with words.
Tech Interview Guide does not condone spying on the former First Lady.
Please don't check me out, FBI.
Which musician do you think would make the best teacher?
Musician. I listen to a lot of Korean pop, and a Korean pop artist just released a song. Her name's Lisa, and she was on a reality TV show, and she was one of those teachers that was like, if you do it wrong, I'm going to kill you. And so, but it made everyone be a lot better. So
Nice.
I would say her.
I would say David Grohl from Foo Fighters. I think he's got like this energy and whatever, and he constantly brings people up on stage and jams with them during concerts and stuff. It's great.
Yeah, it's just like very.
What's the most annoying? Yeah, what's the most annoying color?
I actually don't like the color red, but that's my partner's favorite color.
Really? That's great. Last one. Which Disney princess would make the best spy?
Like the best spy. I mean, I would assume Mulan, because she basically was a spy because she infiltrated it and posed as the opposite gender. So.
Yeah. Good times, good times. All right. Well, Jen, really appreciate your time. Hope that this stream was helpful for other folks as far as like understanding ways that you can like sort of start building these online profiles, get noticed. If you want to follow Jen, you can follow Jen at Jen Develops on Twitch. Same handle on Twitter, is that right? Also
yeah, I'm Jen Develops everywhere. So
all the places.
Come find me. All the places.
Yep.
So my website is also jendevelops.com. So find me everywhere.
Yep, and follow her on LinkedIn as well. Also good stuff. Yeah, thank you so much for your time and kind of walking us through your journey and talking about like negotiation things and like interview things. I mean, you've been awesome on every stream that I've interacted with you on. So thanks for dropping by our stream a bunch and just dropping questions in. And I'm sure we'll see you over at the Jonan show some Wednesday. Again soon. But yeah, cool. Well,
yeah,
thanks.
Thanks for
hope you had a great
me.
weekend and have a great week.
Yeah, you too.
And we'll talk to you later, everyone. And I think Bob Ross is still doing his thing. It's Sunday night, so go watch some Bob Ross and mellow out and get ready for a good week ahead. And we'll see you folks on Thursday. Have a good night, everyone.
All right.